The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla walked through the corridors with unusual haste. Her footsteps echoed through the empty halls, creating an eerie sound that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. The palace staff had noticed her strange behavior over the past few weeks, but nobody dared to question the Queen's actions directly. Camilla had been spending countless hours in the private chambers that once belonged to the late Queen Elizabeth. These rooms were supposed to remain sealed until the official inventory of royal treasures was completed, but somehow Camilla had obtained the keys. She told everyone that she needed time alone to grieve and remember her predecessor, but her real intentions were far different from what anyone could imagine. Inside the late Queen's personal vault, Camilla carefully examined centuries-old jewelry, precious artifacts, and priceless heirlooms that had been passed down through generations of British royalty. Her eyes gleamed as she picked up a diamond tiara that had belonged to Queen Victoria, feeling its weight in her hands. She knew these treasures were worth millions of pounds, enough to secure a comfortable life anywhere in the world. The idea had been growing in her mind for months. Ever since the late Queen's passing, Camilla felt like an outsider in the royal family. The British public had never fully accepted her, and she constantly felt the weight of their disapproval. The media criticized her every move, and she knew that her position as queen was fragile. Charles had been supportive, but even he couldn't shield her from the growing pressure. Late at night, when the palace was quiet, Camilla would sit in her private study and research different countries where she could start a new life. She had always dreamed of living somewhere warm and peaceful, away from the constant scrutiny of the British press. Switzerland seemed perfect with its banking privacy laws, or perhaps Monaco, where many wealthy people lived quietly away from public attention. The plan began to take shape, slowly and carefully. Camilla started making small withdrawals from various royal accounts, claiming they were for charitable donations or personal expenses. She contacted a private art dealer who specialized in buying valuable items without asking too many questions. Most importantly, she began selecting the most portable and valuable pieces from the royal collection. Her personal secretary, Margaret, had noticed that the Queen was requesting unusual meetings with lawyers and financial advisors. When Margaret tried to ask about these appointments, Camilla would simply say they were related to updating her will or handling personal investments. Margaret found this explanation strange, but she had learned not to question royal decisions too closely. The breakthrough came when Camilla discovered a set of loose diamonds that the late Queen had kept in a private safe. These stones were not officially catalogued in the main royal inventory, which meant they might not be missed immediately. Each diamond was worth a fortune, and together they represented enough wealth to fund her escape plan completely. Camilla began working with a contact in the diamond trade who could help her convert the stones into untraceable cash. She arranged for the transaction to take place in Geneva, which would require her to travel to Switzerland. This gave her the perfect cover story for her planned departure from Britain. She told Charles that she needed to attend a private memorial service for a distant relative in Switzerland. The story was believable because Camilla did have some distant family connections in Europe, and Charles was too busy with his own royal duties to investigate further. He agreed to let her take a private flight, which was exactly what she needed for her plan to work. The most challenging part was figuring out how to transport the stolen treasures without detection. Camilla couldn't simply carry them in regular luggage, as security would certainly notice valuable items during routine screening. She needed a way to hide the treasures that would allow them to pass through airport security without raising suspicion. After weeks of planning, she came up with an ingenious solution. She would have the jewelry and small artifacts sewn into the lining of her clothing and packed inside specially modified cosmetic containers. The larger pieces would be shipped separately using a private courier service that didn't ask too many questions about their cargo. 3 days before her planned departure, Camilla began the final preparations. She carefully removed the selected treasures from their display cases and storage areas, replacing some items with high-quality replicas that would fool casual observation. She worked mostly at night when the palace staff was minimal, using her knowledge of the security schedules to avoid detection. The royal guards had noticed that Camilla was spending more time than usual in restricted areas of the palace, but they assumed she was simply taking comfort in familiar spaces during her period of grief. Nobody suspected that their queen was systematically looting the royal collection. On the evening before her departure, Camilla packed the last of the stolen items into her specially prepared luggage. Her hands shook slightly as she closed the suitcase, knowing that tomorrow would change her life forever. She had already transferred enough money to her Swiss accounts to last for years, and once she sold the stolen treasures, she would never have to worry about money again. The flight was scheduled to leave from a private terminal at Heathrow Airport, which would allow her to avoid most of the normal security procedures. Camilla had used this terminal many times before for official royal travel, so her presence there wouldn't seem unusual to anyone who might see her. As she prepared for bed that final night in Buckingham Palace, Camilla felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She was about to abandon everything she had worked for years to achieve, but she believed it was her only chance for real freedom. Tomorrow, she would either be living as a wealthy woman in Switzerland, or she would be facing the biggest scandal in modern royal history. The next morning arrived gray and rainy, which seemed appropriate for such a dramatic day. Camilla dressed carefully in clothes that contained hidden pockets filled with valuable jewelry. She applied her makeup normally, but her cosmetic bag contained far more than just beauty products. Each item had been carefully chosen and prepared to help her steal millions of pounds worth of royal treasures. Her driver arrived exactly on schedule, and Camilla walked calmly through the palace doors for what she believed would be the last time. She carried herself with the same dignity she had always shown in public, but inside her heart was racing with nervous energy. The most dangerous part of her plan was about to begin, and there would be no turning back once she reached the airport. The black Bentley moved smoothly through London's busy streets as Camilla sat in the back seat, trying to appear calm and composed. Her personal protection officer, Detective Inspector James Morrison, sat beside her, completely unaware of the fortune in stolen royal treasures that surrounded them. Morrison had been protecting members of the royal family for over 15 years, and he prided himself on his ability to detect potential threats and unusual situations. Something about today felt different to Morrison, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what was bothering him. Camilla seemed more tense than usual, and she kept checking her watch every few minutes. When he tried to make casual conversation, her responses were short and distracted. He had seen her travel many times before, but never with this level of nervous energy. The drive to Heathrow Airport took longer than expected due to heavy morning traffic. Camilla found herself growing more anxious with each passing minute, worried that the delay might somehow interfere with her carefully planned escape. She had memorized every detail of the airport layout and security procedures, but unexpected delays were the one thing she couldn't control. Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, a young curator named Sarah Chen was conducting her weekly inventory of the late Queen's personal collection. Sarah was known for her attention to detail and her photographic memory of every item in the royal collection. She had been working on cataloging the late Queen's possessions for several months, and she knew the location of every valuable piece. As Sarah entered the private vault that morning, she immediately noticed that something was wrong. The lighting seemed different, and several display cases appeared to have been moved slightly from their original positions. She began checking each item against her detailed inventory list, and within minutes she discovered that several pieces were missing entirely. The diamond tiara that had belonged to Queen Victoria was gone, replaced by what appeared to be a clever replica. A set of emerald earrings that had been gifted to the late Queen by the Sultan of Brunei was also missing. Most shocking of all, The private safe containing loose diamonds had been completely emptied, with no explanation or documentation of where the stones might have gone. Sarah immediately called her supervisor, Dr. Robert Henley, who was the head curator for the royal collection. Dr. Henley had worked for the royal family for over 30 years, and he had never encountered anything like this situation. Within minutes of receiving Sarah's call, he was rushing through the palace corridors to see the evidence for himself. When Dr. Henley examined the vault, his worst fears were confirmed. Someone with access to the highest security areas of the palace had systematically stolen some of the most valuable pieces in the royal collection. The theft had been carried out with careful planning and detailed knowledge of the items' locations and values. Dr. Henley immediately contacted the palace security chief, Commander Patricia Williams, who had been responsible for protecting royal assets for over 2 decades. Commander Williams was known for her no-nonsense approach and her ability to handle crisis situations with calm efficiency. When she received the call about the missing treasures, she knew that this was potentially the biggest security breach in the palace's modern history. The security team began reviewing footage from the palace's extensive camera system, looking for any evidence of who might have accessed the vault during the past few weeks. The cameras showed that only 3 people had entered the restricted area during that time period. Dr. Henley himself during his regular inspections, Sarah Chen during her inventory work, and Queen Camilla during her supposed private grieving sessions. Commander Williams felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications of what they had discovered. If Queen Camilla was responsible for the theft, it would create a scandal that could potentially destroy the monarchy itself. However, the evidence was becoming increasingly clear, and Williams knew she had a duty to investigate every possibility, regardless of how uncomfortable it might be. She immediately began trying to contact Camilla's private secretary to determine the Queen's current location and activities. When she learned that Camilla was supposedly traveling to Switzerland for a memorial service, Williams felt her suspicions growing stronger. Switzerland was known for its banking privacy and its willingness to accept valuable assets without asking too many questions about their origin. Williams contacted Detective Inspector Morrison, who was still traveling with Camilla toward the airport. She spoke carefully, not wanting to reveal too much over an unsecured phone line, but she managed to convey that there was an urgent security situation that required Morrison's immediate attention. She instructed him to delay Camilla's departure by any means necessary until the situation could be properly investigated. Morrison was confused by the cryptic message, but he had worked with Commander Williams long enough to know that she never exaggerated security concerns. He began observing Camilla more carefully, looking for any signs that might explain why she had suddenly become a security priority. He noticed that she seemed to be carrying more luggage than usual for a short trip, and her behavior was definitely more nervous than he had ever seen before. At the airport's private terminal, the normal security procedures were being quietly reinforced. Additional officers had been stationed at strategic locations, and the usual relaxed atmosphere of the VIP facility had been replaced by a subtle but noticeable increase in security presence. The airport security chief had been briefed on the situation and was prepared to implement whatever measures might become necessary. Camilla's flight crew was also being discreetly questioned about any unusual requests or modifications to the standard flight plan. The pilot reported that Camilla had specifically requested that certain items be loaded as diplomatic cargo, which would exempt them from normal customs inspection. This information immediately raised red flags for the security team. As the Bentley approached the airport entrance, Morrison received another call from Commander Williams. This time, her instructions were clear and direct. Under no circumstances was Queen Camilla to be allowed to leave British territory until the security investigation was complete. Morrison was authorized to use whatever authority necessary to prevent her departure. Morrison felt his stomach tighten as he realized the gravity of the situation. In his 15 years of royal protection, he had never been asked to prevent a member of the royal family from traveling. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough to override normal diplomatic protocols and royal privileges. The car pulled up to the private terminal entrance, where several additional security officers were waiting. Camilla seemed surprised by the increased security presence, but she maintained her composure as she stepped out of the vehicle. Morrison stayed close to her side, his hand resting near his concealed weapon as he prepared for whatever might happen next. Inside the terminal, a senior Royal Protection officer named Captain David Walsh was waiting with a small team of carefully selected personnel. Captain Walsh had been briefed on the situation and was prepared to handle what could potentially be the most delicate arrest in British history. He knew that every move would be scrutinized and that the slightest mistake could have enormous consequences for everyone involved. Camilla walked confidently toward the departure lounge, apparently still believing that her plan was proceeding smoothly. She had no idea that her theft had already been discovered, or that a carefully coordinated operation was being put into place to stop her escape. In her mind, she was just minutes away from freedom and a new life in Switzerland. The tension in the terminal was almost palpable as various security personnel took their assigned positions. Airport staff who were not directly involved in the operation were quietly moved to other areas, ensuring that any potential confrontation would not be witnessed by unnecessary personnel. The stage was set for a dramatic conclusion to what had started as a carefully planned theft, but was rapidly becoming a royal crisis of unprecedented proportions. Captain David Walsh stepped forward as Camilla approached the security checkpoint, his expression serious but respectful. Behind him, 2 additional Royal Protection officers flanked the entrance to the departure lounge, effectively blocking any possibility of proceeding to the aircraft. The atmosphere in the private terminal had shifted dramatically from its usual relaxed efficiency to something that felt more like a carefully controlled military operation. "Your Majesty," Captain Walsh said with a formal bow, "I'm afraid there has been a development that requires your immediate attention. We need to request that you postpone your departure while we address an urgent security matter." Camilla felt her heart begin to race, but she maintained the regal composure that had served her well throughout her years in the public eye. She had anticipated that there might be complications, and she had prepared herself mentally for various scenarios. However, the serious expressions on the faces around her suggested that this was not a routine security delay. "I'm afraid I don't understand, Captain Walsh," she replied with carefully controlled authority. "This is a private matter, and I have commitments in Switzerland that cannot be delayed. What exactly is the nature of this security concern?" Walsh exchanged a quick glance with Detective Inspector Morrison, who had moved to position himself behind Camilla. Both officers were experienced in handling delicate situations, but neither had ever been involved in anything quite like this. The protocols for detaining a reigning queen were not covered in any training manual they had ever studied. "Ma'am, we have received reports of missing items from the palace collection," Walsh explained carefully. "Commander Williams has requested that all departures be postponed until we can complete a thorough investigation. This is purely precautionary, but we must follow security protocols." Camilla's mind raced as she tried to calculate her options. She could attempt to assert her royal authority and demand to proceed with her travel plans, but the determined expressions on the security officers' faces suggested that they were prepared to resist even royal commands. Alternatively, she could try to maintain her innocence and cooperate with the investigation, hoping that her careful planning had left no concrete evidence. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she said with practiced indignation. "I am traveling to attend a family memorial service, and these delays are completely inappropriate. I demand to speak with someone in higher authority immediately." Meanwhile, additional security personnel were conducting a systematic search of Camilla's luggage and personal items. Expert investigators trained in detecting concealed valuables were using specialized scanning equipment to examine every piece of her baggage. Within minutes, they began discovering the carefully hidden treasures that Camilla had believed would pass undetected through security. The first discovery was a necklace of rare pearls that had been sewn into the lining of Camilla's travel coat. The pearls had belonged to Queen Alexandra and were worth several million pounds. Next, investigators found a collection of antique rings hidden inside what appeared to be ordinary cosmetic containers. Each ring was a masterpiece of royal jewelry craftsmanship, representing centuries of British royal heritage. As each stolen item was carefully removed and documented, the security team realized that they were dealing with one of the most audacious thefts in royal history. The total value of the recovered treasures was estimated to be worth tens of millions of pounds, representing a significant portion of the royal family's most precious heirlooms. Commander Williams arrived at the airport within 30 minutes of the initial discovery. She had spent the drive preparing herself for what she knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of her career. When she entered the private terminal and saw the evidence laid out on inspection tables, she felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness. Relief that the treasures had been recovered before leaving the country, and sadness that someone in such a position of trust had betrayed that responsibility so completely. "Your Majesty," Commander Williams said as she approached Camilla, who was now sitting in a private waiting area under careful observation. "I'm afraid we have recovered substantial evidence that connects you to the theft of royal treasures. At this point, I must formally advise you that you are under investigation for grand theft and violation of the Official Secrets Act." Camilla's carefully maintained composure finally began to crack as the reality of her situation became unavoidable. She had spent months planning what she believed was the perfect escape, but she had underestimated the efficiency and dedication of the palace security systems. Her dream of freedom in Switzerland was evaporating before her eyes, replaced by the nightmare of public disgrace and potential imprisonment. "I want to speak with my lawyer immediately," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I want to speak with my husband. Charles must be informed of this situation before it goes any further." The airport had been quietly placed under a security lockdown while the investigation continued. All flights in and out of the private terminal were temporarily suspended, and additional security personnel were stationed at every entrance and exit. The media had not yet learned about the situation, but everyone involved knew that it would be impossible to keep such a dramatic story secret for very long. King Charles was contacted at Balmoral Castle, where he was attending to royal duties. When he received the call from Commander Williams explaining the situation, he initially refused to believe what he was hearing. The idea that his wife could be involved in stealing royal treasures seemed absolutely impossible to him. However, as Williams provided more details about the evidence that had been discovered, Charles was forced to accept the shocking reality. Within hours, a team of senior government officials, legal advisors, and royal household staff had assembled to determine how to handle the crisis. The situation was unprecedented in modern British history, and there were no established protocols for dealing with a reigning queen who had been caught attempting to steal crown treasures. The legal implications were staggering. Camilla could potentially face charges of grand theft, money laundering, and violation of various royal privileges and responsibilities. The political implications were even more serious, as the scandal could potentially damage the monarchy's reputation for generations to come. As news of the airport shutdown began to leak to the media, speculation started spreading about what could have caused such dramatic security measures. Several news outlets reported that there had been an unspecified security incident involving a royal flight, but the full details of Camilla's attempted theft remained closely guarded secrets. In the private terminal, Camilla sat quietly with her legal advisor, finally understanding that her elaborate escape plan had failed completely. The stolen treasures were being carefully cataloged and prepared for return to the palace, while security experts analyzed every aspect of her theft to understand how she had managed to access and remove so many valuable items without initial detection. The investigation revealed that Camilla had been planning her escape for several months, systematically studying security procedures and identifying the most valuable and portable items in the royal collection. She had opened secret bank accounts in Switzerland and had been working with international art dealers who specialized in handling valuable items without asking too many questions about their provenance. As the sun began to set over Heathrow Airport, the full scope of the scandal was becoming clear to everyone involved. Queen Camilla, who had dreamed of escaping to a new life of freedom and luxury, now faced the possibility of spending years in prison. The royal treasures that she had tried to steal were safe, but the damage to the monarchy's reputation would take much longer to repair. The airport remained under security lockdown as investigators continued their work, ensuring that every piece of evidence was properly documented and preserved. The private terminal that had been designed to provide discreet and comfortable travel for royal family members had become the scene of the most dramatic royal arrest in modern British history. For Camilla, the golden dream of escape had turned into a nightmare of disgrace and legal consequences. Her attempt to flee Britain with the late Queen's treasures had ended not in Swiss luxury, but in a British airport under heavy guard, facing charges that could destroy everything she had worked to achieve throughout her life in the royal family.